Amazing. Thank you so much. And finally, we're recognizing the most attended live session in the Empower history. And we're talking, of course, about the live session Experiments and MVPs, led by none other than Kim Goodwin, one of the most respected voices in our field. So to close out today's program, we're thrilled to revisit this topic and hear a new, fresh take from Kim herself, who is now joining us live from California. So we hope that, she seems to be online. Yep. So congratulations to you, Kim, and the screen is yours, I guess.
Yeah, it is. Congratulations,
Thank
Kim.
Thank you. Okay, give me 1 second just to share the screen.
And Kim, we do not see your face. If it's possible to put on the cam.
My camera should be on.
We saw you for like 1 second. There you are.
There we are.
But
okay.
Can you? But now we don't see you. Can you put it off and on again?
Okay.
Teams.
All right.
Who did prefer Teams compared to Slack?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. I'm so jealous I don't get to be there with you. But I'm going to share my slides again.
We still do not see you. If it's possible to turn it off and on.
I will try again.
Yep.
Did a tech check just a few minutes ago to make sure that it worked.
No worries.
Any better?
It just jumps on and off.
Well, how would you like to proceed?
But we will hear you.
Yes, you will hear me.
Yeah. Great.
Okay. All right. Are you seeing the right thing now?
Yep.
Okay. So anyways, I am delighted to be here with you. I wish I could be there in person. Events like this are so good for connecting with your colleagues and having fun, but also just sharing our challenges and realizing we're not alone and hopefully learning some things from one another. I'd like to talk about one of the challenges that I hear from lots of teams and that I have seen on my own design and product teams, which is that, we struggle with building MVPs. And so I would actually like to say something perhaps controversial, which is that we should stop building MVPs. And instead, I think we need to really focus on doing better experiments and just getting better at product learning in general. So, there are a number of things in tech that I think we take as articles of faith, right? This whole lean mindset of build, measure, learn, and starting off with the minimum viable product is kind of a given, right? It's just this thing that we assume is true. And I'm sure we've all heard the main arguments for this, right? That we want to build minimum viable products because we're reducing our risk by learning and iterating quickly. Makes sense? We also have a more user-centered argument for it, which is that if we can deliver some piece of customer value sooner or improve someone's experience sooner, why wouldn't we want to do that and deliver incrementally? That's also great. So, I don't argue with either of these goals. The challenge is I don't think we talk enough about the tension between these goals, right? They're sometimes at odds with one another. And we're sometimes so focused on minimizing risk that what we deliver is a lot more minimum than it is viable. And so that customer value we're delivering is kind of questionable. Or, we're so focused on building that we don't recognize an opportunity to learn much faster than by building something. And so I think we have to stop assuming that these two things are mutually compatible. The other thing I see happen is we kind of use MVP sometimes as an excuse to avoid prioritizing. We've all seen this situation, right, where we have lots of stakeholders who have a long, long wish list. And instead of wanting to disappoint them, the product manager says, well, let's just build an MVP of that. And so we end up building lots of MVPs of things. But then we have too many things and we can only revisit a couple of those. And so the MVP turns out to be something that stays there for years maybe and exists for a long time. And then PMs wonder, why don't the designers and my stakeholders, why do they keep trying to cram so much stuff into the MVPs? Don't they understand what the M means? Well, it's because we've trained them that we're not necessarily going to revisit these things and iterate as much as we theoretically ought to. So I think we need to move on from this notion that building equals learning, right? We very often build without learning all that much, and we don't need to build in order to learn in many cases. Sometimes we do, but there's lots of learning we can do without. Now, I'm sure you've all seen some version of this diagram, right? Where you build a skateboard and then that evolves into a bike and you iterate into a motorcycle and eventually get to a car. Well, if you'll allow me to be a little melodramatic, I would really like to hurl this diagram into the sun and watch it burn up, because I think it is reinforcing some harmful assumptions, right? For one thing, we would really have to suck at problem definition and user research to think that a skateboard was solving the problem that a car solves, right? So we're starting to build something that isn't serving the same audience or meeting the same needs. That doesn't make any sense, right? Even basic user research should tell us that, people need to be able to take their families and their pets and their groceries along, and they need transportation in the cold and the snow and the rain, and they need to go long distances, and a skateboard just isn't suitable for those things. So what happens if we ship a skateboard is it doesn't actually teach us a whole lot about building a car. So this notion that somehow we can ship whatever we want as a skateboard and somehow get to the thing we need, I know it's a bit exaggerated, but people take it a little too literally sometimes to think we don't have to invest in understanding upfront. Now, you know what can teach us a lot more about cars than a skateboard is chairs. The designers of the original Mini had an important question, which is how small can we possibly make a car and still have it be functional? And so they laid out 4 chairs on the floor of their workshop, and they asked people of different shapes and sizes to sit in them. And they looked at, can you get in and out? And do you have enough leg room? And can you cross your legs? And can you open up a paper map? Which, yes, I know that seems antiquated, but they take a lot of space. And does that all work? And they very quickly and inexpensively learned a ton about how big a Mini needed to be. And they didn't build a darn thing. So, we talk about minimum viable products. What I find is that people focus too much on that word product, right? Now, a lot of people will tell you, oh, well, that's what a minimum viable product is supposed to be. The chairs in the Mini example are an MVP. Maybe that's the intent, but language is powerful and people really focus on that word product and they think it has to be something we ship. So, I just don't use this word. I think we need to jettison this particular term. I don't think it's helping us. I actually think the old school words work better. If we're making something to learn, why don't we just call it a prototype? Now, the benefit of calling it a prototype is it implies pretty strongly that we're going to throw it out. This is not a thing that is meant to deliver customer value. And all of a sudden, that clarifies everyone's expectations. And we don't have that baggage of trying to make it something that is useful for our customers. And then we have product releases where we're trying to put value in customer hands. These are fundamentally different goals. Now, of course, we hope we're going to learn from our product releases too. But if we're not focused on delivering value first and then learning from it, we're going to get something that not only doesn't deliver value, but ends up not even being a great experiment. And this is a problem I see in a lot of teams, is that they focus too much on the minimum in minimum viable and not enough on viable. Just to give you a small example, a client of mine was building a health chatbot. And their goal was to reduce abandoned conversations because they wanted, of course, to get people to provide more data and to see more content that would help them be healthier, right? So the way this chatbot worked, it wasn't an LLM. It was mostly canned responses that you could choose from. And this is what people use most of the time. And sometimes there would be a free text field available that would use some natural language processing. And what they found, though, was people were mostly not using that field. So usability testing and interviews showed two issues, 2 reasons for people to abandon their conversations. One is that those responses are too limited. If I ask how well you sleep and the only options are great and awful, well, how do you respond if your sleep is just medium? You can't. And so you start to get frustrated. Well, the other thing that testing found was that the text entry field just is kind of invisible. People weren't seeing it. And so the team decided to, one, expand on the text, the canned options, and two, to find ways to make this field more visible. There are lots of design solutions, but the one they chose was to draw attention with animation. That was what they wanted to test first. And so, the idea would be when the text field was available, it would just sort of subtly slide into view and slide away when not in view. So that was the design proposal. The product manager said, great, we'll build and test an MVP. So what happened was they spent a minimum amount of time emphasizing the M, and it was poorly implemented. It was a junior developer who wasn't really great at UI stuff, and the animation looked kind of like this. I don't know how well that translates on Teams, but it was kind of jittery, kind of laggy, and it got very cumbersome very quickly. The designer said, I don't think this is viable, and it shipped anyway, and they ran the 2-week test. And the result was a statistical tie, right? It looked ever so slightly worse than the control group of the existing design, but it was within the margin of error. So in other words, the result is that the team didn't learn anything. And so this was a poor experiment. It wasn't helpful because they didn't actually ship something meaningful. Whether this would have been a different result if they had polished it up a little bit more, hard to say. But at the end of this experiment, the team is arguing, and that is not the outcome we want from our experiments, right? If you're arguing at the end, it's a waste of time. So we have to stop designing inadequate experiments. And this is easier said than done, right? There's lots of healthcare experiments out there, for example, that are poorly designed and we make decisions on for years. We have to start defining good hypotheses to begin with, and we have to start really focusing on whether we're using the right methods. So a colleague of mine was telling me a story about a product she was involved with. It was a productivity tool. They were trying to help people find underutilized features because there were tons of features, lots of toolbars in this thing. And so what they did was they said, well, if we revise the information architecture, make the buttons bigger and more colorful and label them, people will find the features easier. And so they did a comparative usability test, between the two and asked for people to find the features. And the new design did work better, much better in the usability test. So they were surprised when they shipped it and the users hated it. Well, it turns out they had a bad hypothesis and they chose the wrong method. They assumed that these features were valuable when in fact users had actually found the features they wanted, and all of this other stuff was just even more in the way now. And because they were usability testing it, they were testing the wrong question with the wrong method. Now, all of you, of course, are saying, gosh, if they had just done a couple of user interviews up front, they would have learned this. Exactly, right? And I know I don't have to sell all of you on this. The key, though, is slow is fast. In space exploration and in other safety critical jobs, this is a common saying, right? Not that we have to really be slow for the sake of being slow, but that we have to be methodical, right? If we're in a hurry and we're just focused on speed, we're going to make mistakes. And when we're so focused on fast learning and fast iteration and move fast and break things, we forget to stop and think, oh, is this the best method? Do we really know that we have a solid hypothesis? So one of the things that we need to do is we need to build systems. We need to, as Björn was just saying, build the engine in order to make our experiments better. So this is about training, it's about processes and templates, it's about culture that makes us pause and ask questions. So we also have to start defining good samples, right? These are other methodological pitfalls I see very frequently, where we use a convenience sample instead of really making sure that it represents our users. And lots of uncontrolled variables show up in our product experiments too. Now, some of you might be a little sad at this one, right? For many years, it's been believed that light to moderate drinking was actually good for our health, right? And there were some studies that showed it was a slightly lower risk of dying than if you abstained completely, which is very comforting to those of us who like the occasional glass of wine at our ambition events. Now, ambition events are absolutely good for your health, that I'm confident of, but it turns out that alcohol is maybe not quite as good as we thought, because in a review of the methodology of these studies a couple of years ago, some scientists found that, they had a sample definition problem, right? A lot of the abstainers used to be drinkers and they had been often heavy drinkers who now quit for health reasons. And so it looked like they were having more health problems, but it was actually not as clean and neat as everyone thought. And they also didn't control for other habits like diet and exercise. So, if we don't have really good discipline about things like our samples and our other variables, we're going to be making poor decisions based on this. And if we're making bad decisions based on it, that's not really a great, efficient way to learn. So, some issues that I see very frequently in consumer domains, for example, are our user cohorts representative and are they comparable? One thing I see frequently in, say, testing email campaigns or something, or even product tests is if we're comparing to a baseline versus something simultaneous, is there anything else going on in the background that might affect behavior? In the case of this chatbot, for example, the ad campaigns they were running in a given week, you might be recruiting teenagers one week, mostly, and then the next week you might have almost entirely brand new moms. Now you can imagine these two groups of people are saying different things to the chatbot and encountering different content. In a way, you might say they're encountering different products. So are they really comparable if you're comparing week to week instead of at the same time? Not so much. Also, are you controlling for things like platform differences or environment differences? In this case, they only tested on Android, which is sensible, right? You don't want to build twice, but it turned out they actually had some significant differences between Android platform behaviors and iPhone behaviors, surprisingly enough. So how comparable was this result? Hard to say. And we also have to look at, are we at a fidelity that might create some issues for us? So all of these things need to be well disciplined when we're doing experiments, right? We want to make sure that this is a good use of money. Now, of course, sometimes we do have to ship in the real environment in order to learn, and that's fine. But rather than calling it an MVP, it's a pilot, it's a beta. And that helps remind us that we have to design that pilot as an experiment and make sure that we know what's the hypothesis we're testing, what are we trying to learn, and we're really making the most of that opportunity. So when I say stop building MVPs, I'm not saying let's abandon iterative learning, absolutely not. What I'm saying is let's not default to building as our starting point, right? Instead, let's focus on building better systems to learn. And I think that really is 5 components. I'll leave you with this thought. One is we have to be good at developing questions or hypotheses, right? If we're talking about learning systems, as Björn just was, right? These are, I think, our key components, our skills, if you will. Are we basing our questions and our hypotheses on good data? Are they related to our product strategy and our corporate strategy? Are they testable hypotheses? It also helps, in my experience, if you have institutional memory about your product learning. Has another team or has this team asked this question before? And what did we learn? And equally important, there's enough context in that institutional memory so that we know, is that learning applicable to this situation? Or is it a different enough situation that maybe it doesn't quite apply? We need to be skilled at choosing the right methods, right? That fastest or cheapest approach that can give us a good answer in an ethical way, right? With confidence. And that last point at the bottom, be accepted by our stakeholders. Sometimes the fastest, cheapest method is one that we'll spend a lot of time arguing about. And so it turns out not to be the fastest or cheapest, right? So politics is certainly a consideration. We have to have skilled execution, right? We need to be good at developing samples and understanding statistical relevance. In that example with the chatbot, right? The results were statistically a tie, but the team said, oh, well, they look worse. And so they actually were over-interpreting the data. We don't want to do stuff like that because it leads to bad decisions. And finally, we have to be good at communication. And when I talk about communicating around product learning, I don't just mean, can we effectively put the results in a PowerPoint? What I mean is we're actually including our stakeholders and everybody at the beginning when we're figuring out what is the question we're trying to answer so that everyone feels like we're doing the right thing, using appropriate, reliable methods, and we can interpret those results with confidence so that we don't end up having an argument about the experiment. In fact, we learn from it and we can move quickly and move on from there. So I know you've had a long day. I'm going to leave you with that. Thanks for listening to my heresies. And I hope to see you all in the product and leadership tracks in the fall after a wonderful summer vacation.
Thank you so much, Kim. And again, congratulations to that award, experiments and MVPs.